Marcos, welcome to the World XP podcast. I feel like this has been a little bit of a long time coming, and I appreciate your last minute flexibility, of course. Do you want to do a quick intro for yourself for the people listening, and then we can jump right into it? I think we've maybe discussed this at practice once or twice, doing something like this, but now is finally here. So, do the quick intro for the people listening, and then we'll hop into
Of
the
course.
question from the last guest, and we'll just see where it takes us.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me on, Eric.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm Marcos. I am a first year law school student at American University, Washington College of Law here in Washington, D.C. I'm in my second semester now, about to finish, just turned in my first big appellate brief and then last writing assignment for the year. So it's crazy to think that I've almost completed a whole year of law school. It's absolutely flown by. I know Eric through soccer. We first met each other at Arlington Soccer, where we play right now. And yeah, we just hit it off right away. I recognized him as not only a great guy, but a brilliant soccer
You
player.
don't have to lie to everybody.
No, let me gas you up for a second.
Okay,
And then
okay,
I
okay.
I titled him McAllister, which is a nickname that I hope to continue for the nearby future.
I'm gonna have to shave now. Um, okay, so the question from the last guest, I think this will actually fit in a little bit to because we're in DC and there's been so much chaos. Question is, what have you observed in the last month that gives you hope for the future of America? We'll say it doesn't have to be month. We'll say recent history.
Yeah. So two things. One, being in law school, I realized that a lot of people are passionate about preserving the Constitution and what it tells us to do. That involves, professors who are going to rallies, professors who are uh, writing about topics that will impact potential amici briefs or briefs written to Supreme Court decisions that are going to be decided in this term that are really, really important. And then for students who are willing to speak out and pursue areas of the law that will help make the United States feel normal. And, we live right now in a crazy era, regardless of where you stand on it, the law is being rewritten or reinterpreted. So I think the students at American University are very passionate, regardless of where they stand. And that makes me happy to be an American and happy to be an American at American University. So
Lots
I'm pumped for
of
that.
lots of open discourse and debates. I'm hoping is that the case? People kind of feeling whichever, like you said, whichever way they stand, people willing to speak about it and stand for principles that they believe in. Is that kind of what you're finding?
For sure. I think where I've seen that the most is in constitutional law. So as a first year law school student, we take a ton of doctrinal courses, and one of those required courses is constitutional law. Our professor, unlike many professors at American University, I won't call her out by name, but she has been a lot more vocal about how she stands in regards to Trump, and that has created a place for some students to feel more comfortable to say what they otherwise wouldn't, and where they otherwise would be stopped by a professor, and the professor would be like, let me challenge you on this, let me push back. In constitutional law, it's become a bit of an echo chamber in that class. But there are other students who are now starting to give their own opinion about certain topics. And that discourse, I think, is really important. Not only in the classroom, but it's now transferred into, like study rooms or common areas where students are sitting down and talking about things that I think most Americans should be talking about, pushing back and having uncomfortable conversations. And, I'm not the type of advocate who's gonna say that, your uncle who's super passionate about Second Amendment rights should be bringing it up at the Thanksgiving table and having an open discourse. But, more of those conversations one-on-one, I think is important. And our school has been good at encouraging those.
Yeah, that's super great to hear. I remember in my own undergrad, um, between 2013, 2017, that kind of shift of like sophomore, junior year started to become like Yeah, I'm not gonna say what I think. I just want to go get my grade and go home because you was worried about repercussions in certain
Mm.
class. Obviously, like with class like math or whatever, math is math. But other ones where there is more seminar based or discussion based, I remember like mentally being like, nah, I don't agree with that, but I'm gonna not say anything. So it's really great to hear that that discourse is coming back a little bit. I think is completely necessary and like you mentioned, especially for law, right? There's different ways to interpret law and words, um, and even kind of expanding on that a little bit into like regulatory policy and other stuff where it's like not necessarily like law, but it still is law because it's got the force of government behind it. Then you
Yeah.
change a word here or there, or and change the way that you interpret a word here or there, and then all of a sudden it's like means something completely different. Okay, so let's go maybe chronologically a little bit. Where was the interest in going to law school? Was that always a thing, or was that a thing that you found later when you were at William and Mary, or like growing up, were you like, oh yeah, I want to be like Judge Judy, or like something like that?
I think both. So both later on and both inheritable.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad was an attorney in Guatemala, and he practiced um, predominantly family law. Worked with my grandfather at his firm, and my grandfather was an attorney. And I think, throughout my life, I saw my dad first as an attorney, and he really enjoyed what he was doing. And then he transitioned into an organization that he recently left called International Justice Mission. And their whole goal is to strengthen criminal justice systems in other countries and work and partner with local organizations, with law enforcement to help maintain the rule of law and protect people from violence. And so my dad did that for 18 years. That was a massive influence on me because the organization holds a lot of conferences that they invite donors and family members to attend. And at those organizations or at those meetings, they bring a lot of victims of violence who have been affected by the lack of rule of law or police brutality in other countries. And they speak on those topics. And I remember one conference here in DC where a victim statement really impacted me. And I was like, huh, there's something important about preserving the rule of law and going after people who do heinous stuff. And so I started off with a sort of like a prosecutorial background. My dad had been in that area of law. And so that really influenced me. I actually interned with International Justice Mission, and I did mostly like editing for victim statements. I did that for one summer in undergrad. Throughout undergrad, I also studied a lot of African American history. And so that brought me into the world of the typical, what we know in the United States, like the defendant. In the United States, we have a unfortunate history of over criminalizing minority populations, and I became really, really passionate about that. And so once I graduated undergrad, I knew since I went into undergrad that I wanted to go to law school for my dad's influence, but what I'd studied in undergrad and took a gap year, studied for the LSAT, which is the exam that every law school or most law schools require. Some law schools are now getting rid of that. And got a score that I was decently happy with, applied to a ton of universities, got rejected from a ton. And that was a process and maybe something we can talk about a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because we're starting to see a crazy jump in the amount of applications, something that I noted the other day. The Washington Post was talking about how Georgetown Law went from 10,000 applications, which is a normal amount, to now 14,000 in 2024. So a 4,000 application jump is crazy for them. They had to hire extra admissions officers to, look at the applications, and it has become a lot more competitive in the last couple of years. And I definitely saw that in my experience. I
Mm.
got some rejections from schools that I felt more comfortable about getting into. And American University was actually one of the last ones, or the first one to give me an acceptance, and the last one I had applied to. So I applied in like February because my mom's like, Marcos, these applications aren't looking very good. And I'm thinking, no, no, let's just give it some time. Like, hopefully I'll get an acceptance. And then American University was the last one I applied to. 2 weeks later, they got back to me with an acceptance. And I was pretty much set on going because it was in DC. My family lived in Fairfax. I wanted to stay in the area. And yeah, I forgot where we started, but that was sort of the influence of what got me into law school. And I was really happy to go to American University because they were ranked top 25 in criminal law. And that's the area of law that I've been most interested in. This summer, I'm doing an internship with the Fairfax Public Defenders. And so criminal law is probably where I'm going to be going, but
Mm.
anything can change after the second year depending on the internship I do.
So at William and Mary, were you doing? Was your degree in? What's your degree in?
I was history pre-law. So I
So
did
okay,
as
so what?
many.
So for people that have no idea what pre-law means, because I remember hearing that term in undergrad, and I was like, I have no idea what that means. But my college, I don't think really had that necessarily. But you hear that term like pre-med or pre-law or pre whatever, and then in my head, I'm just like, isn't that just taking like history and writing and philosophy courses, and then,
Mhm.
but so like describe kind of how you come to that. Obviously, pre-law makes sense, but history, like what pre-law consists of, um, balancing that as a student athlete, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's different for every school. Some schools have a designated pre-law track where you're required to take a certain amount of courses and it's like a whole major in itself. I describe doing history pre-law because I was a history major without an official pre-law track, but I took every single course that I could find on the law possible. So, for example, in my senior year, I took a course called Equal Protection of the Law. And it's termed that because in the 14th Amendment, it says that every citizen is entitled to equal protection under the law. And it was ratified in, I think, 1868 with the purpose of protecting African Americans' rights as new citizens in this country. And so I took that my senior year. And, at William and Mary, we had a ton of law courses. There was gender and the law, and that focused a lot on like abortion jurisprudence, Dobbs cases, Roe v. Wade, that kind of stuff. I took of course my first year of undergrad that focused on the law and African Americans. So how we have overcriminalized them. We focus on a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which talks about overcrowding in prisons and overcriminalization. And so I took basically all the courses that I could on pre-law and with the hopes of going to law school at some point. But I know that it can be very different at law schools. Now, when it comes to balance, history gave me a lot of reading. And the history department at William and Mary is incredible. The professors are really, really dedicated, but it was definitely a lot of reading. What I did learn as a student athlete was that because I had a lot of reading and not a lot of time, I had to get my stuff done at designated hours. I couldn't just put things off. And if they didn't get done, I was not going to get good grades. Like we had a schedule where basically I had to take courses between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. because by 3:30 I had to be in the locker room for 4:30 practice or 4 o'clock practice. And then training from 4:30 to 6:30 or 7, depending on whether we had, a longer practice or we had lift after. And so most of my homework was done like during the lunch hours or between classes or at night. And so I became used to doing most of my reading between 7:30 o'clock and 10:30 at night. Um, but I like the fact that I had to do my work at certain hours. There was other students who said, I have like my own schedule. I like to read in the morning, or maybe I'm a night owl and I do my reading at night. No, I was forced to do that at a certain time, and that motivated me to get it done at the hour because I knew that if I didn't, I was going to get the grades that I wanted. Overall, I found the balance to be enjoyable. I was pretty disciplined in that I was motivated to get good grades, and so I got my stuff done when I needed to. It also helped that other student athletes who were also really dedicated to their studies were on the same track. We're traveling together on the bus. You see other students or other student athletes get, doing their work, and that motivates you too. And personally, like I'm very motivated by other people doing stuff. So
Mm.
if I see my best friend working on a paper and I'm here doom scrolling on Instagram, the competitive nature of being an athlete, I'm like, this guy's doing better than me. Let me hop on my paper real quick.
Hmm.
And so it really helped out to be a student athlete because I liked getting stuff done when I needed to.
Were you able to find, we'll say, was the open discourse? Did you find that as well at William and Mary? Was there a diverse kind of perspective on things? Because especially like the Roe v. Wade situation, obviously people feel very strongly about that, whatever side they stand on.
Mm.
Was there open debate in that class or some of the other ones or about various topics, or was it more like you mentioned, like echo chambery in the one that you mentioned at American? Like, were you able to find those things? Because I think like, well, I don't know. I'll just let you go and we can. I'll have a follow up or whatever. But did you find that or not? Not so. Like, what was your experience?
Unfortunately, no. I think it was more of an echo chamber feeling at William and Mary. I think William and Mary is known for being very liberal. It's a liberal arts school, so it attracts a lot of students who want to have a lot of autonomy over the courses that they take. One of the things that they're known for is that we don't have a lot of required hard sciences. I have not taken a hard science since high school. The last like hard science I took was business, or hard science was business statistics my freshman year of college, and then I did not touch.
Don't call that a hard science, bro.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
it's
have a
not
physicist come back on here later and shoot me for allowing you to say that.
that's the closest I got to a hard science course, and I've not touched it since. But yeah, I would say for the most part, it was pretty much an echo chamber feeling. It
The reason I ask
was,
though is
yeah.
because if you go like regardless of where people view these things or what their opinions are, I find often um, when speaking with people who fall in a particular, uh, we'll say, political persuasion, that oftentimes there's a lack of understanding of where the other person is coming from, and that is a little bit concerning to me from the standpoint of it's like, okay, yeah, this person voted for this person that I don't like, therefore they're an idiot. It's like, no, this is not the case. They have views and they have things that they think about, and you need to understand why they think this way. And then if you want to have a real discussion on policy or um, law or whatever the case, like whatever the subject is, if you're actually going to get somewhere and not just yell at each other, there needs to be a level of understanding. And I think that is not like I've not been in the universities like as a student in like 8 years, so I can't speak for the last like couple of years. But people I know that have been in them, unless they're in a hard science, are kind of just like what I mentioned earlier, where it's like if I disagree with the professor, it's like no, I just don't say anything and I just get my grade and go home. And it's like I
Mm.
thought that's what universities were supposed to be for, like philosophically speaking. Um, and so I think somehow we need to figure out, we as a society need to figure out a way to get back to that because then, as you mentioned, kind of getting to a more, we'll say, normal state. It's like I don't really know that we're getting back to what used to be called normal. Like I don't think that that is if that's feasible. I think there'll probably end up being some sort of new new normal. Although I hate the word
Hmm.
normal because like everything is shifting all the time. So it's like
Yeah.
is everything is changing always. So like there's never a normal really. Um, but that's the reason I ask because it's like regardless of how you feel, if you want to make real change, you need to understand where the other person is coming from because you need to meet them where they're at. And if you don't meet them where they're at, then there will never be any compromise. There will never be any ground, like no solutions. It'll just be people yelling at each other, which is exactly what we've seen. Um, like you see on one news site that people that like Trump are just like country bumpkins in the flyover states that are ignorant, and then from the other side, the we'll say the Fox News people will say, "Oh yeah, they're just snowflakes and they don't understand anything and they just want to have their blue hair and go get their Starbucks." And it's like neither of those really like some of that can be true, right? Stereotypes exist for a reason, right? Oftentimes there's some truth to them, but like at the end of the day, each person is an individual with their own life.
Yeah.
And so that it bugs me to hear that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm glad that at American you're getting more of that open discourse. All right, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. But from this
No, let
from
me touch on
yeah,
that a little bit.
go.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very fair point. What I was thinking in all this when you were talking was a lot of us get frustrated because what we see on social media, what we see on Fox News, CNN, whatever it is that you're paying attention to, it goes after our heartstrings. So it touches on
Always.
topics that are really, really sensitive to us. And we're watching this and we get pissed off. We get pissed off, and then we go out into our world where we have the most impact, and we do the less possible or the least possible in order to have a conversation with someone who is different from us. And we think that the most impact has to come from, the laws being passed, what the president is doing, what the Supreme Court is saying, the laws being passed in our states. And that's where we have the least amount of impact. So in my perspective, what we should be doing is get off your Fox News, get off your CNN, take those sensitive topics and go talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
Find a moment to have a conversation with them. The other day, one of my buddies at law school, who I don't agree with on certain topics, posted something on his social media in regards to the Luigi Mangione situation.
Mm.
And I felt uncomfortable about what he was propagating, but the underlying message I was with. And so I
Mm.
messaged him and I was like, hey, I feel uncomfortable for propping Luigi Mangione as his hero, but I think that your underlying message is important. Let's talk.
I think a lot of people feel that way or similar. They're not happy with that industry, but that doesn't mean that you should go do what he did, obviously.
Of course, of course. And so that's sort of what I was trying to tell him. And we had a great conversation during class. He approached
Mm.
me, we talked for like 15 to 20 minutes. And in 15 to 20 minutes, I went from, oh, he's just trying to put him up as this hero because, he's called out the system to, huh, his experience has a lot more to say about where this frustration is coming from. And I understood him as a comprehensive individual rather than just a post online. And
Hmm.
so, like you were talking about earlier, we need more of that. And in classrooms, a lot of students who may not be on the left, like a lot of academia is, feel voiceless, feel like they can't speak on certain things. And teachers need to do more, regardless of where they stand, to encourage those voices to speak out, even if they're wrong, even if they're misinterpreting history or, saying the things that they don't agree with. There needs to be more alternative discourse, and it's not happening. I mean, I didn't feel that way at William and Mary. Now, where I see some professors struggling with is that they, at least at the end of the day, they have a curriculum that they have to teach and a designated time. And so,
Hmm.
how do you fit open discourse with a majority of students who are going to be taking the most time in the classroom and also teach what you have to teach? I see that as an issue when you have a minority of
Oh, I mean,
students.
of course, right? Like this is not this is not a quick fix. This is like a cultural shift at universities, generally speaking.
Of course.
Um, and so it's not like one professor all of a sudden decides that they're just not going to teach their class and just have debates every class. Like, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
That'd be
Um,
nice.
yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice. Okay, so you're going through William and Mary, taking classes on law when where you can find them. Um, The LSAT. Talk about studying for that. Finding is it similar to like SAT, ACT type situation, or is it slightly different? Um, Talk through that, and then kind of the application process. Is it different from how different is it from the undergrad process or other maybe disciplines in grad school? And then how you went about kind of choosing your programs that you would apply to, because I think that's also important to touch on. People going into undergrad, like, okay, yeah, UVA is a good school, or William and Mary is a good school, or the Ivy Leagues have good schools. But for grad programs, there's like these very, unless you're in that field, there's often like some random school that's got the best program for this very niche thing. Like, oh yeah, this tiny school out in whatever has got the best cancer biology program, and you're like, I've never even heard of that place before, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. So talk through that whole process. So you graduate, and then what?
Yeah, so starting with the relation with SAT, I am the worst guy to ask about those similarities because I committed to William and Mary to play soccer my junior year,
Okay,
same
well,
year that
never
I was
mind.
taking
Just
the SAT.
describe.
Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
And what I will say is it is different in the sense that the SAT is a lot more substantive. So it's trying to bring in all the topics that you've hopefully been taught in high school and then putting them on exam and then giving you a score at the end of it. The LSAT is different because the LSAT is like a language to learn. So the LSAT is very learnable. You can sit down and do a course for 3, 4 months. I would say do not study longer than 3, 4 months for the LSAT because you're going to get so bored, especially with the games which are no longer on there. They took those off. You know, the logic games that everyone talks about, those are out
There was
now.
games on the LSAT.
They were like mind games, not mind games. Like they would give you a pattern, and
Uh-huh.
then you'd have to predict what would happen in uh a certain amount of sequences, and it was sort of like that. So it was a lot. It felt more like math, but still a lot of reading. So what I would say is
Dude,
two
I
things.
could just go on coolmathgames.com and all right,
I wish it was
anyways, keep
coolmathgames.com.
going.
That would have been a lot more fun. Yeah, so for any prospective law school student, two things. Take a course, 3, 4 months, no longer than that. And then underlying that, become a great reader. Read as much as you can, read on your free time, read hard things. One of my professors for one of those courses that I took for the LSAT was a really math heavy guy, and he told me, go read stuff that makes you uncomfortable because you're gonna go and take the LSAT and you're gonna get a passage about marine biology in South Africa, marine biology in, Ecuador, and you're gonna feel so uncomfortable and bored and you're gonna want to fall asleep, but you have to understand the underlying message of the passage. And so he told me, go look at um, the Wall Street Journal, because there are some great writers on there talking about niche topics, and you're going to have to parse through the language and understand what they're trying to say, and then that'll help you apply it to the LSAT. And so I did that. I studied for the LSAT for 3, 4 months. I took it twice, was not happy with my first score. My second one, I was like, this is enough for me to get into a school that I would be happy going to. And I don't want to keep doing another course because that's the other thing. They're expensive. These courses are really, really expensive. And so if you're a student who's concerned about the money side of things, study on your own. Try to find some books on Amazon that you can pick up and, some courses on YouTube. There's a lot of free YouTube channels that give courses on the LSAP. Um, but yeah, I did that course and then took it, applied, and got in.
Nice. All right. Good. So first day of class. What's the class structure like? Remember we were talking at practice, and you're like, yeah, it's super different. I've got like one paper and one test, and that's it. And there's some college classes that are kind of similar to that. But first day of class, did you have the same or like similar kind of first day of school jitters as you go into like high school or college, or was it different now? You're like, okay, I'm here for law, I'm qualified, like I know. that this is what I want to do, like I'm happy to be here, or where you're like, oh my gosh, all these people are also law people and they're all impressive and all these things. How was it? How was was there a big adjustment or not so much?
That's a great question. I think the biggest adjustment was believing in my own capabilities.
Hmm.
Because in undergrad, you all come in as newbies with only your high school experience, and you don't get like specialized in a field in high school. You go into undergrad and you don't know what you're taking. And you go in with a ton of students who don't know what they want to do. In law school, that can be the case, but there's also students who are 29, 30, 35, 40, and then 22-year-olds who are straight out of undergrad. And the other students who've had a lot more real life experience are a lot better prepared than you. That's just the reality of things. I think that's why a lot of law schools look at people who've been out of undergrad for a while because they've learned how to do life. They know how to balance their time. They know how to meet timelines, and they're just better prepared. And so for me, having only taken 1 year out of undergrad and then done an internship with the Arlington Public Defenders, I had to go into the classroom reminding myself that I'm here for a reason. All the topics that are going to be covered here are also new to everyone else, unless they've, for some reason, been a paralegal or gotten a certificate and practiced criminal law or property, whatever it is. So that was the individual adjustment. Now, what the classroom felt like was a lot like a history philosophy course where 55, 60% of the time the professor will be speaking, and then 40% of the time you have your typical cold calls. And so that's the biggest introduction to the group setting of law school is a lot of professors will have you on cold calls where you will have to be ready for whatever is going to be asked. Um, what I've learned in the second semester is that those cold calls don't really matter that much. You're gonna stumble over your words. You might misstate the law. You might get a fact wrong. Guess what? The person who's gonna go after you is also gonna get it wrong. What matters is what the professor says right after. Make sure you write that down. Make sure you get the accurate description of the law. And then because it's one final at the end of the year, there's your chance. And so one of the biggest surprises at the end of the semester, I remember one of our legal research and writing fellows who was like a student but acts as a TA told us, look, I know you guys are all really nervous for these exams, but let me tell you, you can learn property and you can learn criminal law based on what you've taken so far in 3 to 4 days. Create an outline, you will learn property in 3 to 4 days. And I didn't believe him. And then last semester, I sat down, went over everything they taught us, 3, 4 days. Report was like the back of my hand.
I mean, that's
That
good. It gives you the framework to learn things quickly and like how to frame that sort of thing. Was there also an adjustment from the standpoint, because I remember we had this conversation, I think during warm up like a month ago, about that there's not really like when you're writing a paper like that, there's not really a right or wrong answer. It's more how you argue like with the scenario that's presented to you. Was that an adjustment as well? Because I like when I, for example, when I
mm,
train kids and I'm like, do you have any questions or like what do you think about this skill? And they're like, they don't want to answer. And I'm like, there's no right or wrong answer. Like this is not school. Just answer like whatever you think. But there's I think people are so ingrained that like okay it's either right or wrong or like there's a thing I should do or I shouldn't do then it's like when you go into life it's not often not that simple and I think a lot of people have a hard time adjusting to that just in
mhm.
life saying like okay I should text this person or I shouldn't text this person or like I should answer this question or I shouldn't answer this question or I should apply for this job or I shouldn't apply for this job instead of like all the gray areas of like, okay, maybe you need to try some stuff and just see what happens or whatever the case may be is. Did you have when you were writing that first big thing where it's like, yeah, as long as you argue it well, then you're good. And were you nervous about like, oh well, what if I'm arguing the wrong point? Like, did you spend time like worrying about that, or did you have to adjust for that?
Definitely, definitely. I think that maybe I had an advantage to some students who did not take a lot of history courses or pre-law courses, where in history I could get a topic and then I could argue a particular way. As long as I had a strong argument, I would get a good grade. I didn't have to have the correct history, the ultimate, the final answer. It wasn't like math where 5 + 5 = 10. And the
Mm.
people who were in hard sciences were used to the 5 + 5 = 10. Um, but all of us felt pretty nervous for that first exam because a lot of our professors, for example, in criminal law, you'll get a rule that is different for every jurisdiction. And most states will be divided on one rule of applying, for example, the way that we look at specific intent, or another half of the states will be divided on the other way of applying the law. And so our professors will give us two cases. We'll just call it Eric versus Marcos in the first one. And so they tell us, look, if you get this topic, apply Eric versus Marcos. Now, if you think that's the correct answer, devote 70% of your answer to Eric versus Marcos. But don't forget that we also have Eric versus Coach Phillip, because that's the minority rule. And I
Yeah.
still want you to write it down on the exam and apply the law, because you're going to get a lot of points there. And so that's where if you apply both sides, you'll get the B+A. If you don't apply the other side, you're likely going to get a B, C+. And so
Mm.
that was definitely an adjustment, because you don't only have to remember the best answer, you also have to remember the not so great answer, but with the analysis of it. And that was an adjustment, but it's only getting better from last semester.
Has it been eye-opening to you somewhat to see that the same case can be applied, like the same um like situation can have so many different precedents applied to it, or the level of interpretation that can kind of fluctuate, and if you get to a situation where the government's taking an action, or some maybe we'll say like, well, actually, well, any situation. Like for me when I think of law and lawyers, it's like it's not necessarily in the best. It's like it's more like, okay, these people are there to like beat each other in the courtroom, and then everyone else is just there to like be convinced or not be convinced. And like that, for like that leaves me with like somewhat of a sour taste in my mouth. Or like when you get a situation where um maybe like you'll see this in the cop TV shows where they like catch some guy, but they're not going to press charges because he goes and snitches on the other guy, and people are cutting
Mm-hmm.
deals or taking plea bargains or whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
and it feels so. And I think this applies to a lot of things, right? The tax code maybe as well, where it's like if you're just a person doing your life and you're not a psycho like me who reads a bunch of stuff all the time, or you're studying this stuff like you kind of just are at the whim of whatever, like almost to some extent, like if you get a lawyer who's in a bad mood, that like let's say you get a reckless speeding ticket or whatever, and your lawyer's in a bad mood that day, like well, you're kind of screwed then. And it's like it feels like that's, I don't know. It's a weird kind of there's not really a question. I don't know. These are just my thoughts. I do you have thoughts on that? It feels strange to me because we're supposed to have this like legal framework and government kind of regulatory framework that is supposed to not let that be the case, but I feel like there's been so much wheeling and dealing that there's so many precedents now that like, you know what, this event happened. Let me just go through the list of cases and see which one I like the best and then
Mm-hmm.
do that one.
Choose them out. Yeah, choose
Yeah.
them out. No, you bring up a lot of important stuff. And the first thing I will say is, at the end of the day, these courtrooms, juries, lawyers are humans. And
Mm-hmm.
so we carry all this stuff into a courtroom, and judges sometimes are pissed off, sometimes are having a good day. I've experienced that my junior year of high school, got a stupid ticket, had this whole plan with my mom about what I was going to say. I step into the courtroom, judge asked me what happened when I was speeding. The whole plan that I had with my mom went out the window.
Always.
I became fully human and was acting in the moment and went on this whole thing about how it was a Friday afternoon and I just picked up Chipotle. I was headed over to my friend's house, having a good day, lost track of the speed. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Ticket.
The judge was having a good day. On another day, a different judge probably would have gotten that ticket upheld.
Yeah.
In that moment, lowered it. I walked out that courtroom smiling. My mom was not happy the fact that I'd not stuck to the plan.
Yeah.
But hey, it worked out. And so yeah, it's a system run by humans, and it reminds you of two cases that we've looked at in criminal law. And I'll stick to that area of law because it's the one that I'm most interested in. But you have one case, um, horrific case where a man finds out that his wife has been cheating on him. He, is arguing with her throughout the night and he's really pissed off about it. She goes to bed and he reminds himself that there's a shotgun propped up on the window. And he's going over his head about how not only she's cheated on him, but she also beats his kids. And so he's getting more pissed off as he's thinking about this. And so he decides, you know what? Shotgun is there. Let me do something about it. So he picks up the shotgun and he shoots her in the back of the head multiple times. Second degree murder
Mm-hmm.
or first degree murder, right? In that case. And then we have another case that we looked at where this guy was living with a family and he'd been living with them for a couple years. And one day the mom had to go get groceries. So she tells the son, hey, do you want to come with me to get groceries? So the son comes with her. They leave behind their daughter, who at the time I think was 5 years old. And she stays back with that guy that lived with them. There's no other facts about whether the little daughter like threw a knife at him or for some reason angered him. Although I don't know what would anger you about a small little 5-year-old girl, but he kills her with like multiple stab wounds all over her body. Horrific details about potential like sexual assault after the fact. And in that case, they find second degree. How does that happen? Because you have a jury who comes in with different jury instructions about how to interpret the law of first degree or second degree murder, how to look at intent, how to look at heat of passion, and they come out with completely different outcomes. In the second case, you would think to yourself, that has to be first degree. That's worse. That's morally worse. You have a brutal murder of a child with no provocation. And in the first case, you at least have some moral basis to be like, yeah, this woman was not so great, beating her child, cheating on her husband, still not justified, but at least the guy has something. And you come
Mm-hmm.
out with completely different outcomes. And like you said, humans being humans results in very confusing outcomes, especially in criminal law with different jurisdictional rules.
Mm. And also, when the thing that you mentioned about like this is morally worse, I think morals are not equivalent to the law. And I think that's something that people struggle to wrap their head around because it doesn't feel like that should be the case. But in it kind of they kind of have to be separate in some cases, I think.
Yeah,
And
very true.
it doesn't like sit well with people. You're like, that's wrong that that person can do that. You're like, okay, well, yeah, maybe that means that it's like when people are like, "Can I arrest that guy for being an idiot?" It's like, no, you can't do that. It's like let's not do that. Yeah, maybe he's driving or she is driving in a way that you don't like or whatever, but you can't just arrest them because you don't like them. It's like that's a very simplified version, but um, I normally when I say that, I have a good example off the top of my head, but it is 9 in the morning, so I don't. Um,
Yeah, we need that second coffee, right?
yeah, we
Is that
do.
coming up?
Yeah, so probably after this, yeah, I'll grab one. I'll grab one. Probably a Celsius to get ready for the game. Okay, so so you get through your first semester, um, grades come back. Remember, you're like you did well. So like going into the second semester, do you have a level of kind of relief or like weight off the shoulders of like, okay, I got to the first one. I know kind of what to expect generally, even if the classes are different. Like I've more or less kind of sorted myself out in terms of you've got the first one good, or is it because are the classes different enough that it's the same kind of or similar kind of feeling?
Yeah, so it became easier because they are the same setup as in, okay, we're going to get into class, we're going to learn what contract law is all about, and at the end we'll have an exam that tests all our knowledge. What I've learned in the second semester is that if I'm assigned 30 pages of reading for a class, I will not be reading 30 pages. I'm going to be reading like intensely
500 pages.
15. The rest I will not be paying attention to because guess what? It's
Hmm.
not going to be an exam.
No, I
And
went the other way. I thought you were gonna have to read more for context. That makes sense though.
yeah, when I look at a case, I now basically just like scan around to where I can find the issue, the rule application, put it on my notes, and then come to class and be prepared to write down whether I got it right, whether that's an accurate description of the law, and then add anything else the professor may be talking about. And so I find myself spending a lot less time reading and a lot more time, like going over what the law is and trying to really understand it. And that gives me more time to, do practice questions and study the actual substance rather than just like going through a ton of notes on the book that are just not going to be tested on. And
Hmm.
so that's a lot of weight off my shoulders now because in the first semester, I think a lot of law school students feel like this. We feel like we need to get in everything that we can and like become the most knowledgeable people about everything possible in contract law and property and all this stuff. When the reality is, one, I'm likely not going to be a contract attorney. I'm not going to be in big law. Two, this is what I'm reading right now is likely not going to be in the bar exam. What I need to learn is what's on the syllabus. And so sticking to that syllabus in the second semester has been a lot better. What I will say about the second semester is that other interests start to pop in. So in the first semester, they tell you, focus on your classes. Don't add a lot of extracurriculars because you will not have time for it and you're not ready to take on more. In the second semester, by the second or third week, we're getting emails from Office of Academic Excellence and all the offices involved with getting us jobs about where's your job at? Are you applying? Are you doing interviews? Okay, if not, you have to get on it. And that has brought a lot of stress to students who have not found internships. And it's April.
Hmm.
Most internships start in May. And so people are really, really stressed this semester because not only we have to balance the classes, you have to do interviews on the side to find jobs, apply, write your cover letters, all this stuff. And then
Chat
also,
GPT, bro.
oh, that ChatGPT has been beautiful with the cover letters. What I did with mine, and this is a good tip, write a really good cover letter for a specific organization. For example, like I was applying to public interest organizations like the ACLU, and then a lot of criminal law stuff. So Arlington Public Defenders, Fairfax Public Defenders, state attorneys' offices. What I would do is I'm going to write a really good one for criminal law, and then I'm going to put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, now reconfigure this so it fits for a public interest firm that focuses on civil rights. Boom. And then edit it, edit, edit, edit. That's been amazing. Thank you, ChatGPT. Don't post this because I might get in trouble for it.
Well, I
No, I'm
mean,
kidding.
all three people will watch, so it's fine.
Well, three people will connect. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, it's a lot more interests that are starting to come into the second semester. And, we're also some people have joined student body organizations or joined moot court, mock trial. I didn't do those because I don't see myself doing 60 hours of work on top of whatever else I'm doing. And I'm also playing with Arlington, and that has been the best thing for myself. To do something that makes me happy, that is also competitive, where you're telling me I get to play with Eric Jennings, who is a class player, and all these other guys who are pursuing pro and are super talented people, and I get to do law school. Like that's a good gig. And so I'm really happy I get to do that on the side because it keeps me sane.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
good
you,
group
Eric.
for sure. It's a good group. All right. I know you got to get out of here. If you had any advice for people pursuing law school or like things that you've learned, I mean, we've talked a lot about what you've learned, but um, pieces of advice, things of that nature for anyone that might be pursuing it.
Yeah, for the application process, I would say take a test blind without any studying, see what you get on it. That'll serve as your foundation for how much you need to study. And then get yourself a prep course. Do it as like it's your full time if you can. Um, get a score and then look at the schools. Don't look at the schools before because if not, you're going to come out with bad expectations about where you want to get in. And then apply to schools that have the interest of law that you think you want to go into. So if you know you're really interested in criminal law, look at the criminal law programs and apply to those schools and do not obsess with rankings. So the US News report comes out with rankings and going to a school that has like top 10 for some stuff, or criminal law top 30, that then comes out with a 90 in the country, it's a load of BS. Look at look at the interest and then look at the location. If you want to be in DC, don't go to Alabama School of Law. Because you know what? If you look at Alabama School of Law and where they send their students, most likely New York, DC, Chicago, big cities, especially if you're interested in big law stuff. And so look at the cities, focus on that, because likely you're going to be taking the bar exam of wherever it is that you're going to law school or in the surrounding jurisdictions. And I think that's really important. You have to always look ahead to see where you'd want to practice. And so don't obsess over rankings, focus on the topic and do your best because it's really competitive right now and there's a lot of applicants. So you're going to get a lot of rejections. And so stay happy and positive and look at this podcast if you can.
Yeah. Any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Any what?
Any last thoughts before we get you out of here?
Go Arlington. Tune in today, please. We're going to get the dub.
This will be out after the game, so hopefully we will have already won by this point. Last time I said that on a podcast, we didn't win. So maybe,
Do you remember
maybe,
what game it was?
yes, unfortunately, I do remember exactly what game it was. All right, guys, thank you for listening. Margo's bio, any links that he wants will be down in the description. Go check him out. And we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah,
Peace.
thank you, Eric.
Yes, sir. Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.